Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and welcome back to another episode of Care Florida's groundbreaking series, Exposed: Politics and Persecution in the U.S. Today we bring you a harrowing tale of a young woman, a mother of three, who was kidnapped in Pakistan, shot by U.S. soldiers in Afghanistan, renditioned to the United States, given an unjust trial in New York, and sentenced to 86 years in prison for a crime that no evidence has linked her to. She's now serving her sentence at the Carswell Federal Prison in Fort Worth, Texas, and her story sounds unbelievable because it is. And joining us to discuss her case today is her legal counsel, attorney Marwa Al-Bailey, as well as the executive director of Care Texas, Brother Faizan Sayed. I'd like to welcome you both to our program and thank you very much for joining us today. Assalamu alaikum. There are so many websites and videos that tell her story, and although we'll go through it in the program today, we'll link to those videos in the comment section, and I highly recommend that people watch them. I want to focus on her current situation before we go into a synopsis of her story. Marwa, you've been her attorney since January of this year. Tell us what made you take on her case, such a high-profile case.
I was actually contacted by two attorneys out of upstate New York who've been representing her family for an extended period of time. And they were looking for a local attorney to visit her and to check on her welfare. I'm based about an hour from where she's currently imprisoned in FMC Carswell. I'm based in Plano, Texas. So I agreed to visit her. I actually didn't know very much about the case. I'd heard of Dr. Aafia. I knew that she was imprisoned here in the US, but I never actually delved at all into any kind of depth in the case. So after I met with Dr. Aafia, I started looking into it. I read the trial transcript and I started getting a better understanding of the incredible injustice that's happened to her.
What was your first encounter with her like?
My first encounter with her, so she's currently in a prison, FMC Carswell, which is an all-female prison located here in Fort Worth, Texas. It's actually located on a military base. So in order to enter the prison, what I have to do is I have to go through a military checkpoint. It's pretty straightforward. You go up there, you have to be pre-approved ahead of time. And then you go through the military checkpoint, you drive through the military base, get to the prison, go inside. Due to COVID restrictions, I don't actually meet with Dr. Aafia in the same room. We enter, there's basically two rooms in front of each other. We enter through separate doors, and then there's a giant glass between us, and then we pick up the phone to speak to each other. She is as tiny as she appears in those photos. She's very small. She still really is extremely thin. Most of the time when I was meeting with her, she was in this beige clothing. She gets the standard issued hijab from the commissary, and just a very tiny woman.
What was her spirit? How were her spirits when you met her?
The spirits initially, I think it was just, she was happy to see a fellow Muslim visiting her. And I think I'm her first, hijabi attorney or so on and so forth. And I think it was just interesting that she was just interested in meeting me and getting to know me the first visit, but her spirits generally are down. It got very bad after the assault in July of 2021. And that's when she was saying, alhamdulillah, it really was a miracle that she didn't have any permanent damage to her eyes, because the burns, when I say they were right here, right around her eyes. She was assaulted by a fellow prisoner at that time. Right. So her spirit was really down after that.
I can imagine. And I know that you reached out to Brother Faizan with Care Texas, the executive director for Care Texas. Brother Faizan, maybe you can take us a little bit through the narrative, her story, and then from that, really what propelled the momentum forward to pick up the case with such high degree of advocacy at the moment?
Of course, thank you for inviting me on the show and speaking about this important case. The case of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui is one of the greatest cases of injustice in the United States. To make sure all of your viewers really understand the impact of this case, we have to go back to after the terrorist attacks of September 11th. After those attacks, not only was Islam, our faith, hijacked, but also the United States was hijacked. The people who hijacked the United States government were those who wanted warfare, who started the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. They were the people who created really preposterous theories that introduced torture techniques inside the United States, that passed the Patriot Act, all in the disguise of self-defense. And it's in that world that Dr. Aafia was in the United States studying. And she got a full-ride scholarship to MIT University. She then got her PhD from Brandeis University. She got married, she had children, and she was really living the life that so many immigrants want to live. After going back to Pakistan with her family, what happened next is really shocking. What many Americans have to understand is that the United States began a process of kidnapping people all across the world, including in Pakistan. And the governments of other countries would actively sell their own citizens to the United States government for money and for cash. And there was almost a legalized bounty hunting reality that existed. Why? Because the United States had been hijacked with this over response against these attacks that happened. In 2003, that's when Dr. Aafia, while visiting her uncle, basically got kidnapped by the Pakistani ISI, and probably also with the United States government as well. And then she disappeared for 5 years. When she reappears, she's in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan, a city called Ghazni, Afghanistan. And what happens that day when she reappears is what is put on her trial and why she's given 86-year sentence. To make a long story short, is basically alleged that Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, a PhD in neuroscience, a mother of three, 90 pounds, 5'2" height, somehow picked up an M4 rifle that was, according to the court transcript, was left in front of her bed by a U.S. soldier because he, quote-unquote, respects Afghan culture. She then picks up this M4 rifle and allegedly shoots it at 4 U.S. soldiers and 2 FBI agents. Of course, you might ask, okay, if that happened, then there has to be some physical evidence. Are there gun residue on her hands? No. Fingerprints on the gun? No. Maybe residue on her clothing? No. Well, what about the bullets? Maybe they hit somebody. No, that didn't happen either. Well, maybe the bullets hit the wall. That was never recovered either. What about the shell casings? None of those was recovered. The only evidence that really brought Dr. Aafia Siddiqui and gave his conviction was contradictory eyewitness testimonies from the people who actually shot Dr. Aafia Siddiqui and had every intention to make sure that they got away scot-free. Of course, to add injury to this, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui was then renditioned to the United States, even though she is not a U.S. citizen. She is a citizen of Pakistan. She should never have been renditioned to the United States. She was given basically what I call a sham trial in New York, of no other places, the same area where the Twin Towers had collapsed. And the judge in that case, out of his own volition, decided to have her sentences, she was found guilty, to have her sentence be done concurrently, meaning that they were done one after the other. He maxed out all the sentences and he added a terrorism enhancement, meaning that because of the judge's individual discretion, she was then given 86 years in federal prison for a crime that, again, has no material evidence or basis at all. That was 13 years ago that she was first convicted, and she continues to be in jail 13 years later. And that's why I believe that more Americans and more people of conscience need to really stand up for this case, because it is the case of the times, of that dark time that happened right after September 11th. Oh, I'm sorry. I think you might be muted.
Can't hear you.
Thank you very much. I said thank you for that background, and I wanted to ask Attorney Bayati to give us a little bit of perspective specific to the duration of her sentence as compared to other individuals who may have been charged with something similar. Is there a parallel in the sentence or similarity, or is there a huge discrepancy, as we would imagine might be the case?
So like Faizan was mentioning, her case is extremely unusual. The crime happened overseas in Afghanistan. It was on Afghan soil by a foreign national. While Dr. Aafia lived here for over 10 years in the US, she lived here on a student visa. So she's not a lawful permanent resident here, and she's not a US citizen. So the fact that she was renditioned to the United States to stand trial here, very unusual. With regards to the counts that were against her.
Quick question. It's unusual, but is there any legal merit to the illegality of such a case?
So actually, there's a conflict between the circuits on this. In the Second Circuit where she was tried, they did find that it applies. The attempted murder charges are that she could have, that legally that they could have charged her and convicted her on them. There's other circuits that have found otherwise on different types of cases where a foreign national on foreign soil, allegedly where the victim is a U.S. national, that no, that you can't, with the charges, I don't, without making it too confusing, the specific charge, there's a conflict basically whether she should have been charged with those charges and she could be tried here in those U.S. courts, whether the courts have jurisdiction over this charge or not. So some circuits have said yes, some circuits have said no. But in her case, they did find on her appeal that yes, that it was proper and the court had jurisdiction. What the judge did was, as Faizan mentioned, all of these charges solely relate to the events of July 18th of 2008. They have nothing to do with terrorism, and they have nothing to do with her disappearance in the previous 5 years. In fact, they specifically kept the discussion of where she was in those 5 years outside of the court. And so when she was charged on those 7 counts, the attorneys were asking for 12 years. That's what they said would be a reasonable charge because there was nobody injured other than Dr. Aafia, and there was really no physical evidence. So they asked for 12 years. The maximum on one of the counts is 20 years. So what the judge did, instead of just going with the maximum of 20 years on one count, he took each of the counts, like Faizan said, and made them consecutive, 2, 4, and then so until he got the ridiculous sentence of 86 years.
I wonder if any of that had to do with the sensationalization and the smear campaign that was used against her, even though you mentioned that all of the charges had to do with the incident in July. Previously, she was labeled, horribly Lady Al-Qaeda and other names, none of which showed up eventually in the court case. And I'm curious, you mentioned, Brother Faizan, that it's a well-established fact that the foreign governments sold people to the United States with false claims that they were related to terrorist groups. And it's equally well known that false testimonies have been given from prisoners against innocent individuals under the duress of torture or waterboarding, other types of torture. So is there reason to believe that all of that stemmed from this type of occasion and that's what really ended up harming her ultimately?
Of course, in the United States, sadly, race and religion play a major impact in what the media can and cannot say about a person. If an African American does a crime, they'll find the worst photo of that individual, they'll paint him as a thug and a criminal in order to enhance their sentence. If a Muslim does a crime, not only is that person targeted, but then the Islamic center that person attends, her family and their imam are also questioned. If a white person does a crime, then what happened to society? Mental illness, there must be something wrong with the way that we feel that person as a society. So this reality was really hyper-focused against Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. In the media, when Dr. Aafia was renditioned to the United States, the New Yorker and multiple news outlets during that time got away with one of the worst smear campaigns that could not happen today because we've really progressed a lot further as a society since that time. They called her crazy accusations such as Lady Al-Qaeda and others. Why? Not because she had anything to do with terrorism. If she did, the United States government would have loved nothing more than to charge her with terrorism. But they particularly didn't because they know they had no evidence. So the smear campaign happened, and unfortunately, Dr. Aafia was part of that campaign, and that campaign continues to this very day, unfortunately. So this is the sad reality of how race and religion continues to play a role in how the news portrays people, and definitely made a major impact on Dr. Aafia at that time and to this day.
We talk a lot about criticism toward the U.S. government for the way that they handled this case, but I want to draw the attention to the Pakistani government and address a little bit in that regards as well. Multiple Pakistani leaders who were campaigning for prime minister positions or leadership positions in the country, campaigned partially on the promise to free Dr. Aafia, some of them even calling her the daughter of the nation. If they had moved forward with that, they would have received a hero's ovation, because it is such a big issue to many people in Pakistan, and the awareness is certainly heightened over there. But once they came to office, everything went mum. And I wonder, has there ever been an official request from the Pakistani government, Marwa, that you're aware of, to take her back? Has that ever officially been done?
I am not aware of any official requests. I can tell you that she has very limited options in terms of return to Pakistan. The reason being that she has a conviction and she's serving it out. So it's not like the United States can simply, honestly, if she gets it, she has basically, her options are as follows. She can get a pardon from the United States president or a clemency, and that would terminate her sentence and she can return to Pakistan. She wouldn't be able to legally remain in the US. Pakistan can sign the Inter-American Convention on Serving Sentences Abroad. So this is what's really clear, is Pakistan has not signed this convention. It's well aware of this convention. It's known about the convention for at least since 2011, and it's made a decision not to sign it. So by making a decision not to sign this convention, it's making a decision to have Dr. Aafia remain here in US prison. So the way that they get away with it is they keep referring to the option number one, which is this clemency and pardon by the US president, which we all know is very difficult to obtain. I think like less than 1% of them get granted by the president out of the 30,000 or however many thousands that are pending before him. It's extremely difficult, particularly with an 86-year sentence. Sure. So the question that really needs to be asked is, why isn't Pakistan signing that convention? Because the cabinet, and you mentioned the prime minister, it's in his hands, in his cabinet's hands, to make that convention go through.
There was a case or a story that was covered by national news outlets, including Fox News in 2019, where Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan suggested a prisoner swap. And, you know, it really begs the question, you're mentioning something, you're talking about it publicly, you campaigned on this, then what? Is there any answer? Have they provided any reason to why their silence is louder than their words?
You know, and I think that's the million-dollar question. It is important for all of your viewers to know, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui can be freed. Dr. Aafia Siddiqui's freedom is in the hands of not the United States government, but in the hands of the Pakistani government. They have the ability today, right now, to take action that will eventually result in Dr. Aafia Siddiqui being returned to her country of origin. That is what our office at CARE Texas is campaigning for. That's what we're working with Ms. El Bailey for. That's why we went to Washington, D.C. a few weeks ago to do our Advocacy Day. We're going to continue to push that forward. It's important to know this because even though the Pakistan government has called her the daughter of the nation, and even though Imran Khan put it in his nia, the action to not release her from jail is unacceptable. Every day that she's in prison is a day too long, and it is important that all of us who are watching this show today, that if we have any connections or contact with the Pakistani government, that we utilize those connections in order to put pressure on that government to get her released.
That's you know, it sounds like wishful thinking, but it is, I suppose, you have to start somewhere. You have to do something. You have to try all avenues. I know that 2 of her children are U.S. citizens. Marwa, is that a potential avenue to navigate in terms of her freedom through her children?
No, they wouldn't be, like, they would be able to advocate for her, but no, it's really clear what can be done. Pakistan can sign the Inter-American Convention on Serving Sentences Abroad. That would give the U.S. government the ability to go ahead and for Dr. Aafia to be like, okay, now that Pakistan has signed this convention, I would like to be transferred to Pakistan, serve the remainder of my sentence near my family and my friends and the people that I know in Pakistan. So that's the clearest and the easiest way for her to be freed from prison in a foreseeable and a manner that's like more likely than not to happen. So we said those two options initially, which is the presidential clemency and then Pakistan signing this Inter-American Convention on Serving Sentences Abroad. They're well aware of the convention. It has to be ratified by the Prime Minister's cabinet. The question people need to be asking is, why aren't they bringing up this convention? Why aren't they ratifying it? The US has made Pakistan aware of this convention a long time ago when they said that we would like to bring our daughter home. And they said, then the solution is for you to ratify this convention, and then we can go ahead and see and have her transferred back to Pakistan.
Brother Faizan, you recently, CARE Texas led a advocacy day for Dr. Aafia. Had most of the politicians heard about her? Was there familiarity, and what was the reception?
Our goal is to get Dr. Aafia Siddiqui free, and we are pursuing multiple avenues. One of those avenues is to also advocate on our country's end, to meet with congressional officers so that way they're educated about our case and they can put pressure on the president's office in order to eventually get a release to get this treaty signed. Inshallah, that's our goal. When we were in Washington, D.C., surprisingly, almost nobody heard about Dr. Aafia's case, but the more we spoke, the more we talked, the more people started listening. They really understood the reality of it. Our office is working with officers across the country to get everyday citizens to continue to meet with their congressional offices. In fact, if you visit freedoctoraafia.org, which is a website that's run by CARE Texas and the Daily Law Practice, that is a one-stop shop area where you can sign up to sign petitions, you can get involved, you can learn about our advocacy days, you can read up on our case, and so much more. You can also donate and contribute to the legal and advocacy fund for her as well. We believe fundamentally that Dr. Aafia not only can be freed, but she will be free if we are able to put pressure here in the United States and pressure in Pakistan that will accumulate in her getting released. The biggest threat for her release is apathy. She's been in jail now for 13 years. The entire generation has grown up not knowing anything about Dr. Aafia, and it's just easy to put on the back burner. And I think that is one of the reasons why Pakistan has not pushed this forward, because it's easy for them to go to the public, you yell Dr. Aafia's name like you yell freedom in America. People cheer, they vote for you. But then after that, everything dies down. You win office. You don't have to really do anything after that. Dr. Aafia is a real person. She is right now today at FMC Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas. Her children have grown up without a mother for the last 13 years. And for us not to be able to get her out of jail because the Pakistani government is simply being somewhat hypocritical and not signing a convention they already know and now choosing to bring her home is unacceptable. And we are going to continue to advocate until she is free.
Inshallah. I want to share with the audience the website that you mentioned, which actually is absolutely phenomenal, very informative, and just full of very useful information. So basically, it's the Free Dr. Aafia. I made a mistake there. There we go. From this website, you have an incredible amount of information on her case. But one of my favorite things was the timeline, which is so interactive. It allows for people to go through the timeline, which I can't pull up right now for some reason. But it talks about the campaign, the I Am Aafia campaign, the wearing yellow, signing the petition. Also, it has information where you can sign up for more information. So as action alerts come out, you will be first to get them. And it's really important to be able to to commit to assisting and taking action and navigating, because this is the case of a Muslim sister. And there's the timeline right there. It was just really well put together, and it helps clarify a lot of the history and the present day situations, and then everything that happened in the interim. And every issue is hyperlinked to a story or an article or some type of more information. So this was really, really well done. And again, we'll put the website up for people to visit on their own time and watch and kind of be involved that way. Any final thoughts from either of you as we wrap up?
One thing I'll say is that anybody who's watching, if you're moved to take action, visit freedoctoraafia.org. sign up for the petition, follow us for different events and projects that we're doing. We will be doing another advocacy day in Washington, D.C. We will be planning other campaigns across the country, and we would really love to get your support. We'd also encourage you to help us with our educational campaign. Invite us to speak to your Islamic Center, to your community, to your channels. Marwa and I are more than happy to do these conversations, and every single person that we speak to about Dr. Aafia's case is shocked by it, and they're also shocked by the reality that she's still in jail. We can get her free. This is not a case of wishful thinking. This is simply a case of the Pakistani government doing what it has promised, and they'll only do it with your support and with your help, inshallah. The last thing I'll say is that when you visit freedraafia.org, there's another campaign called I Am Aafia, which encourages people to wear yellow on Fridays. Take a selfie of yourself, put that on your social media account, and start that conversation with your friends and family so we can remember Dr. Aafia so that way she knows that she's not forgotten as we continue our advocacy to get her free.
Inshallah. Thank you so mumuch for that. Attorney Bayani, is there anything you'd like to add? I know you had mentioned earlier her condition, which is when she had been hit in the face, and I have this picture that's just really horrific and so heartbreaking. But there's so much trauma that she's going through, and as one of the few people who is privy to speaking to her directly, is there any message that you can relay on your behalf or hers?
We really need to do everything we can to get Dr. Aafia out of there. I mean, her case is horrific. I don't understand how it's been allowed to go under the radar. When Faizan was mentioning earlier, when we went to Capitol Hill, when we speak with other people of the case, they don't even know the name Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. And that is on us as Americans, that we have to do a better job. We have to get our name out there. We have to let people know about this case and the incredible injustice that has happened to her. Dr. Aafia, like Faizan is saying, she's a human being. She's in this I don't understand how or why Allah has written it for her to survive through all this horror, but it is what it is. She's still alive. She's here in Fort Worth, Texas. We need, as Americans, to do everything we can to just at least give her the reprieve of living out the rest of her days near her family with her children. That's it. Because nobody can give her justice in this life for what she suffered.
Well, thank you both for all of your work in this regards, for your advocacy and for your support of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. And finally, dear brothers and sisters, throughout my research, I was listening to a lecture that Dr. Aafia gave in Houston, Texas in 1991. It was given just a few weeks before she was transferred to MIT. And she was talking about women's rights in Islam and imploring the community to follow the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in a man's treatment of his wife. And she was talking about the need for the community to holistically stand up for women's rights. And it was so ironic for me to listen to, because here she is, a woman, a mother of 3 children, a da'iyah who served in spaces that very few people were present in. She delivered Qur'ans to jails, she taught children at the masjid, and she really had high hopes for the Muslim ummah. And I understand, especially through my work at Muslim inmates advocacy, that feeling of despair, that feeling of hopelessness that sometimes people have, especially when you're standing in front of an oppressive world power. But standing up against injustice is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to do. And I'm sitting here listening to her and thinking, what words could I leave our audience with to inspire them to take action for her, for Dr. Aafia? And subhanAllah, then she started speaking and she was quoting ayahs from the Quran, and it was the perfect reminder of purifying our intentions. And so I will end with a quote from her directly from this video in 1991 and remind our audience to purify our intentions, join the campaign, and never ever turn away from an opportunity to take action and work toward the freedom of our sister, Dr. Aafia Siddiqui, and all political prisoners, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
ألم يأن للذين آمنوا أن تخشع قلوبهم لذكر الله وما نزل من الحق? Has not the time come for Muslims that their heart turn towards Allah, remembrance of Allah and what Allah has revealed, which is the truth? Yes, the time has come. The time is now for us to get together and come up with solutions for these problems. Let none of us think that we cannot make a difference. Yes, we can, if our intention is pure.
you.